I would invite Canadians who feel that our doctors should be paid more to suggest that provinces and territories should be using some of that revenue to increase the actual salary.
What? Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Chrystia Freeland was blasted by the media today about her upcoming capital gains tax vote, and her response was to completely dismiss the concerns of Canadian doctors and say it's not her problem.
Let's take a look.
Let me just start by highlighting why we are doing this. We believe in fairness for every generation. And that means we recognize we need to make some really important investments right now in Canada. We need to invest in housing, and the budget put forward the most ambitious housing plan any Canadian government has put forward, a plan to get 4 million homes built. We need to invest in affordability with measures like dental care, a national school food program, more support for early learning and childcare. And we need to invest in economic growth.
Okay, so I keep hearing Freeland say 4 million homes. I hear Trudeau say 5.8 million homes. They need to get this straight as to how many homes you're trying to build and will evidently fail to build.
And we've done the math on this one. That would be more than one home per minute if you're building around the clock, 24/7, 365 for the next 7 years. That's impossible.
Yeah, so it's not going to happen. Not in the least. They need to agree of which faulty number they're actually putting out there, because it sounds even more ridiculous when both of them talk about different numbers. And I love how she says, well, we need to make investment. Okay, so an investment yields a return on something. You're expecting to get money back. When you're dumping money in to dental care, what money are you getting back? Nothing. And you need to pay for that dental care. So that results in increased taxes. Great, thanks very much. And you're dumping money into pharmacare. Why? Like, I understand diabetes, but that's not even the top issue that is affecting Canadians. Why aren't you going after that? And you're going after birth control. Like, what an insult to people that actually suffer from heart disease, because that's one of the number one issues, and that medication isn't free.
Number one killers in Canada too. And I just find it ironic that they are passing out taxpayer-funded birth control, but saying that our birth rate is too low, so low in fact that we have to bring millions of new Canadians into the country every year.
Well, it's even better because, they constantly chastise the Conservatives. They're saying, well, they're making this political and this shouldn't be political. Meanwhile, the only reason birth control is in there is so the Liberals can make this political.
Yeah, so they can relate it to abortion somehow.
Right. It is absolutely asinine.
With measures like our $5 billion investment in research, in postdocs, in universities, with measures like our support for AI, with measures like our investment tax credits for the industrial transition, we know we need to make these investments in a fiscally responsible way, based on a fiscally responsible foundation. And so the fair way to finance them is with tax fairness. That's what we're doing. The two specific questions on entrepreneurs, small and medium-sized businesses. We do pay attention to tax competitiveness of Canada. It matters to us a lot. The Department of Finance has a long-standing tool called METR, the marginal effective tax rate. If you look at the METR, Canada is the most competitive in terms of tax in the G7. We published that table in the budget. Please take a look. We can share it. I think it's around page 390 in French. I think of the 330s in English. We look at it a lot. Second, even after this change in the capital gains inclusion rate, capital gains remain taxed in Canada at a lower level than in jurisdictions like California or New York City.
You know, the most expensive jurisdictions in the United States. That's like saying, hey, well, you know, I didn't buy a Bugatti, but I bought a Ferrari instead. Are you kidding? That's not what we're talking about here. It is a terrible, terrible statement to say, well, you know, we're not the worst. We're just the third worst now because of the change that we're making. And economists are warning the government, don't be doing this because this is going to have a really significant chilling effect on entrepreneurs, on innovation, and people are just going to say, screw it, and go to the United States in even higher numbers. Because there's jurisdictions not in California and not in New York City that actually have a really reasonable capital gains rate in comparison to Canada and obviously in comparison to California and New York City. So we decided to take Chrystia Freeland's advice and go and find her little chart. So here it is. And the issue is that when you get into finance, you get into or go down the rabbit's hole of a whole bunch of different terms, and a lot of them end up sounding like word salad. So she decided to bring up the marginal effective tax rate. So we're just going to provide a brief explanation of what that is.
So the marginal effective tax rate, also called METR, is an estimate of the level of taxation on a new business investment. It is calculated using metrics including corporate tax income rates. It is calculated using metrics including corporate income tax rates, deductions or write-offs, tax credits, and other things. It is used to make comparisons between different nations or sectors of the economy.
So what this chart is showing in the gray bars is what the 2024 marginal effective tax rate is for the countries in the G7. And she's like, look how great we are. Well, the issue is there are so many different metrics to actually measure the effectiveness of economy and the effectiveness of cost of living in other countries that you can't just look at one in isolation and say, see, that's great. So Canada may have the lowest marginal effective tax rate, but we have one of the highest grocery cost of living. We have one of the highest rent cost of living, and we have some of the highest cost of living metrics across other categories of any country in the G7, never mind in the world.
Well, and that's exactly it. Chrystia Freeland is using this specific metric only and comparing us specifically to only the rest of the G7. What's stopping any of these corporations that are currently operating within Canada to just pack up shop and move to some place like China or Bangladesh?
Right, where the tax rates are cheaper.
Much lower.
So I'm not really sure what you're trying to prove here other than, again, trying to gaslight people.
And the rate remains lower than it was throughout the 1990s, a period, I might add, of strong economic growth in Canada. Finally, we are providing meaningful enhancements directed specifically at small and medium-sized business and at entrepreneurs. The increase of the lifetime capital gains exemption to 1.25 million, and that's 1.25 million entirely free from capital gains, is significant and will make a meaningful difference to farmers, to fishers, to small business people across the country. And we're creating a new Canadian entrepreneurs incentive. We've calculated that on the basis of that incentive, up to a capital gain of $6.25 million. $6.25 million is the break-even rate. Below that capital gain, Canadian entrepreneurs and innovators will be better off under our system than they would be previously.
Oh, you mean just like we're better off using your carbon tax than we were previously?
Yeah, I really want to know how she's getting these numbers for this quote-unquote break-even rate.
Yeah, like, sorry, Chrystia, nobody trusts you anymore.
And I mean, the problem is we can't even dissect it because we don't know where she's pulling these numbers from.
Yeah, well, out of her ass, but that's the only source that we have right now. And again, like when the Liberals show up and say, "Hey, I'm here to help," I don't believe you. And when you say you're going to be better off, I don't believe you.
Well, and additionally, Freeland's only talking about the corporate aspect of this capital gains tax. What about the personal aspect? I mean, if you have a family cottage and your parents want to leave it to you, don't count on getting that cottage, or you're going to have to pay a lot of money to the government for it. It's a capital gain. Or what if your parents intend on selling that cottage as a retirement plan? They're going to have to pay capital gains on it. How is that fair?
On the doctors, I just have to say one thing on the doctors, right? You guys are going to ask me. It's a complicated change, okay? On the doctors, I take that very seriously because I think all of us treasure our national healthcare system. We're really grateful to doctors, to nurses, to all the healthcare professionals across the country. And we know that this is a system that needs our support. That's why we are making a $200 billion investment in our healthcare system, the most significant in Canadian history. It's a lot of money to support a system that means a lot to Canadians. We're introducing dental care. That is going to help our healthcare system and take a burden off emergency rooms. We're introducing free diabetes medication and prescription contraceptives, another contribution to our healthcare system. We have put in place 50% forgiveness for student loans for doctors and nurses who work in rural communities because we know the need there is especially great. And finally, I would just point out that doctors can benefit from incorporating as professionals and earning their money through professional corporations. That is a tax advantage not available to many Canadians. They continue to benefit from that tax advantage. Finally, we calculate that provinces and territories, as a result of the increased capital gains inclusion rate, will have increased revenues of around $12 billion. That's a lot of additional money for provinces and territories. I would invite Canadians who feel that our doctors should be paid more to suggest that provinces and territories should be using some of that revenue to increase the actual salaries, the rate of compensation of doctors.
That's
What?
Disgusting.
What?
Downloading this issue to the provinces because you know you screwed the pooch.
So they're basically saying, yeah, doctors, screw you. We don't really care about your pensions that, we told you to set up these corporations, back in the 80s and 90s in order to save for your retirement. But so screw you. If you want to be paid more, go to the provinces because they're going to get money from, all of these other Canadians that we're going to screw with this increased capital gains inclusion rate. And, there's going to be a lot of revenue to go around. So, average Canadians, you want the doctors to be paid more? Go talk to the provinces. Don't talk to us. Never mind the fact that we're the ones that are causing this mess.
Do you know what? It's not about the doctors being paid more. It's about them being able to keep the money that they've earned over the last 50 years.
Right.
That's what it's about. It's about the government coming in and literally picking their pockets and stealing their retirement money and just saying, oh, well, too bad. We don't care. Like, it's infuriating. And then they have the gall to say, if you don't think doctors are getting paid enough, go talk to the provinces. It's not our problem.
And then she talks about, well, this is fair.
You said before that you were not targeting this particular motion at making the Conservatives sort of take a side. But you also, even earlier today, you talked about this as not being a partisan issue. So how come you're suggesting that this is not actually going after the Conservatives to force them to take a position by making this a standalone Ways and Means motion?
Thank you for the question. It's not unusual for a major tax measure like this one to be put forward in standalone legislation. That's quite ordinary practice.
Not when it was initially in the budget.
Yeah, it's normal for that to occur, just by means of an organic government bill. But yeah, it doesn't. It's not normal for it to originate in a budget and then say, oh, well, politically, that's not going to go very well for us. So we're just going to rip that out of there and then, make it its own motion. So that way we can force it right in front of the Conservatives for them to speak to it. And I find it disgusting that she has said, well, this isn't partisan. This isn't partisan. She's constantly saying, well, the Conservatives are going to have to speak to this. The Conservatives are going to have to speak to this.
But
what
it's
is
not
that?
partisan.
What is that?
And I do think it's an important political moment for Canada and for Canadians. We do think this is an important time for our country. It's an important time because we need investments. And it's an important time for us all to take a stand on how we feel those investments should be financed. And as I said in my opening remarks, I do think this is a moment when Canadians should be watching closely what happens in the House and watching closely to see how all MPs vote on this, I would say, defining measure.
On the fiscal responsibility, Minister, you mentioned one option would be adding to the debt, and you didn't want to do that. But your own department put out a report saying that the deficit is tracking to be $10 billion higher than your fiscal anchor of $40 billion. I know there's year-end adjustments to be made, but are you confident that will bring it back to target, or are you going to miss your fiscal anchor for the deficit?
You've answered your own question, Bill, when it comes to the year-end adjustments and the fiscal monitor. It's quite normal for there to be year-end adjustments.
You're going to make an adjustment of $10 billion.
Could you imagine if you ran a household the way that the Liberals run a budget? I mean, could you imagine me saying to Cypher, oh yeah, I really screwed up the household budget this year by like...
$10,000.
Yeah, $1 million.
I wish we had $1 million.
That's what I mean. This government does not have this money. Same as we don't have $1 million, this government does not have the money to quote unquote invest in all these programs.
Well, and the ridiculous thing is she says, well, when we're making these investments, we have to, figure out how to finance them. Well, hold on. Most Canadians don't think that these quote unquote investments even need to be made.
Well, and again, if you run a household, you don't go, oh, look at all these things that I want. Now I need to figure out how to finance them. No, you go, okay, this is what spouse 1 brings in. This is what spouse 2 brings in. Okay, this is how much money we have. How do we make our necessities fit that budget and maybe hopefully have a little bit of money left over?
Like the equivalent here is that Chrystia Freeland is borrowing like $40,000 off of a credit card and saying, hey, we're going to put in a bowling alley into the basement because, we really want a bowling alley, and that'll be great. It doesn't everyone want a bowling alley? Yeah, that'll be great. But we're going to sell all of Johnny's things and Susie's things and one of the cars in order to pay for it.
And we're going to steal money from the neighbors.
Yeah, we're going to steal money from the neighbors. Like, this is the equivalent of what she's talking about here. So you have Chrystia Freeland basically saying, well, too bad, everybody. We're going to be spending money on these frivolous programs to try and buy votes. That's where their investment return they're hoping is going to come from, by the way. This is your finance minister, Canada. And doctors, this is the lady that is trying to screw you out of your retirement. And you're not the only ones. Any professional with a corporation, this is what they're running into. The top, 0.1%.
Well, and the funny thing about that stupid stat was that when they made the stat that, it's only going to affect 0.13% of the population, that's per year. Because if you have a cottage, you only sell it once. You're only affected once. You're not going to be affected year after year after year. So the fact is, it's going to affect a lot more Canadians, but it's only going to affect them once. So somehow the Liberals think that's better, that's okay.
Well, and the other diabolical part to this is they gave Canadians notice, knowing damn well that Canadians with cottages and disposable properties and things like that they were keeping for a nest egg at some point, were going to rush to sell them. And by doing so, the government would get more revenue from that right now at the current rate. So they knew darn well people were going to panic sell. It's disgusting what they've been doing. But we've already received confirmation that Jagmeet is going to be voting for this.
Of course.
Of course.
There we go. My cynical side wins out.
There you go. And it's going to be very interesting to see how the Conservatives come out against this tomorrow. No doubt they are game planning or have been game planning for this because they've foreseen this to be coming. So it's going to be very, very fascinating to see the messaging that they come out against this, because the Liberals have been waiting just to hear them speak against it so they can slam them to say, see, the Conservatives are for the rich people.
And it's up to us to tell the people around us exactly what's going on.
Right? Because the CBC and the mainstream media are going to be running with whatever the Liberal narrative is tomorrow. So just make sure everyone around you has the correct version of what is actually happening here.
The truth.